Well, thank you, and I'm glad you turned out. As Robert said, I've been with the Middlesex Canal Association. I've been the membership director for 20 years, and I first gave this talk to a bunch of canal experts. My Ph.D. is in clinical psychology. Everybody else there in the association seems to be an engineer. And I don't quite get at engineering things, but they love that stuff. So they really like the details and the dimensions and the angles and trigonometry, all that. But does anyone not know about the Middlesex Canal? Oh, okay. Well, the Middlesex Canal was a canal here. It was 27 miles long. It ran from the Charlestown Mill Pond, which is where Bunker Hill Community College is. It went all the way to what was then called Middlesex Village, 27 miles. It's now part of Lowell. At that time, it was part of East Chelmsford. And that canal was built between 1793 and 1803 by hand, using shovels, pickaxes, and no real technology. And there's out of the 27 miles, there's about 11 miles of towpath that are still in existence. Nothing of evidence for the canal exists until you get to Winchester, where Sandy Beach is, and there it starts. But anyway, so if you'd ever like to come see our museum, we're in North Billerica on Faulkner Road. Right there is there are 2 mills there, and that was the summit pond for the canal. So it was the source of the water. The Concord River was the source of the water in both directions for the Middlesex Canal. So I am very interested in canals. And so let's get started with this. So much has been written about the history of the Panama Canal, the most cited work being this book, which is The Path Between the Seas, which was written by David McCullough. He's written Sam Adams, 1776, and a host of others. But he's a nonfiction writer who makes reading these books like they are novels. But it's all from primary sources. It's beautifully written, no holds barred account of the facts, as well as the human story and the challenges. He's read all primary sources, diaries, original letters, public and private, which tell us of the triumphs and the tragedies of the massive tale of its creation. And this, to me, this could be made into a movie. It's very sad. It's very pleasing to know that there was a triumph at the end. It was built, but as you'll see, there's a lot of tragedy involved. It's been on my bucket list, and as a choice for our 70th birthdays together, my best friend and I chose to fly to Panama City, rent a car, and see the most famous canal in the world, as well as the history of the canal country, who now hosts the canal after 70 years of it being United States territory. It was United States territory, sovereign territory, from the time it was completed in 1914 until December 31st, 1999, after President Carter signed an agreement to hand it over to the Panamanians, and it is the largest source of income for the Panamanians. About 12 to 15,000 boats go through the locks every year. So I have borrowed liberally from this book and other sources, and I'll have a slide with the bibliography at the end, but let's take a look at what we're talking about here. Let's see, where did that go? Okay, so this is the area of the world we're talking about. Between North America and South America, and it's been called Central America, it's been called Mesoamerica. But 150 million years ago, there was nothing here. And geologists and meteorologists all agree that this is probably the most important place on Earth because of its consequences for weather. So beginning 150 million years ago, the Caribbean plate, so plate tectonics causes land to uprise. The Caribbean plate started to interact with the North American and the South American plate, and slowly underwater volcanoes occurred, and one by one, the area of Guatemala, parts of Mexico, San Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, all rose above the ocean level at least 30 million years ago and started to be connected by land because of the silt and other debris, and it was continuous. But it wasn't only until 3 million years ago that Panama rose up. When this was completely open at the end of the Jurassic period, it was known as the Great American Waterway. Not that the dinosaurs called it that, but in retrospect, it was the Great American Waterway, and warm Pacific Ocean could mix with cooler Atlantic Ocean, and it was just open. Once Panama rose up 3 million years ago, it completed a complete land bridge between North and South America, which then had tremendous impact on lots of things, but it created what's called the Gulf Stream that you've heard of, and warm, saltier water was brought north to the Arctic, which caused lots of snow, and beginning 25,000 years ago, created the first ice age. And as well as there was much more moisture in the air, and that also has contributed to hurricanes being very frequent in this area. So it really changed the weather for humanity. There are still some active volcanoes, mostly in Nicaragua. There was one very small one while the French were involved in building the Panama Canal. But since then, there haven't really been any. So the idea of creating a canal, and this has been called, the whole of Central America has been called the Isthmus of Panama, dates back to the early 16th century. After Vasco de Balboa first crossed the isthmus in 1513, he realized that a narrow strip of land separated the Atlantic from Pacific Oceans. He and his crew crossed the isthmus about 150 miles east of Panama through the mostly jungle area of what was called Darien. And he was the first European to see the Pacific Ocean. I have something on the history with Christopher Columbus, but Columbus actually found Limon Bay, which is on the Caribbean side of Panama, first in 1502. And he didn't cross the isthmus. However, he would be the first European to actually set foot on the Panamanian area. And I don't need to go through this unless you want me to. Anybody interested in hearing about, it's a little bit it's a little bit off the topic, but he was able to find it in 1502. So this is what anybody would have seen when they got there. All jungle. And in the back, the hills that you see in the distance is the Continental Divide, and it's mountains. And they're not major mountains, but for there, the hills were fairly a difficult area to cut through if you were going to think of cutting through there. But it would look like this, and it was pretty treacherous country to be traveling by. Let me just see how I could get to the next one. Okay, so this is a 1702 Spanish map of the area. This would be Nicaragua, Tierra Firma. That was what they called the area that's now Panama, and this whole area would be what they called New Granada. Was eventually became Colombia. And there are some parallels, very few, with the Middlesex Canal, but people look at the map and think, oh, so the canal goes east to west. Well, actually, it goes northwest to southeast. So the area on the Pacific side is 22 miles east of the entrance on the Caribbean side. And it's easy to not know that bit of the archaeology. And of course, the Spanish conquered all of these areas, and so they eliminated the Mayans, the Aztecs, and eventually down in Peru, the Incas, right? Let's turn the clock back. In December 1846 at Bogota, a one-term congressman acting on his own signed a treaty with President Tomás de Mosquera of New Granada, thus guaranteeing the U.S. the exclusive right of transit across the Isthmus of Panama using current or future developed modes of communication. In this treaty, it allowed the Panama Canal Railway to be built, but it wasn't taken up by Congress until a year later. And so, what major event occurred in 1848? Well, there was a man from New Jersey who was in Sutter's Mill in California and found gold. And so suddenly there was a huge rush to get to California. And how were you going to get there? Well, 3 ways. Take the planes across, take the Horn around. Again, going around the bottom of South America would add 13,000 miles and 4 months to your trip, or the Isthmus over. In January 1849, with 200 Americans aboard, this little steamer Falcon anchored off the marshy lowlands at the mouth of the Chagres River, and some 200 Americans, unshaven young men with rifles, pistols, Bowie knives, bedrolls, pots and pans, picks and shovels, came swarming ashore. They had no idea where the Pacific was and had no help from the natives, but amazingly, all of the first group survived. They came dragging into Panama City, rain-soaked, caked with mud, hollow-eyed from lack of sleep, and ravenously hungry. A Massachusetts man wrote home after the crossing, "I have no time to give reasons, but in saying this, I utter the united sentiment of every passenger I have ever heard speak, and it is this. I say it in fear of God and the love of man to one and all. For no consideration come this route. I have nothing to say for other routes, but do not take this one." That was his first experience, and it became a common experience. The distance from New York to San Francisco, around the Horn, 13,000 miles, yet by way of Panama, 5,000 miles, a difference in 3 months at the time. The horror stories as to what became of a variety of crossings, including an 1850 trek across New Granada, a route there through Colombia, were remarkably similar. Starvation, lethal illnesses, and with men making it out to the Pacific looking like living skeletons, all with shell shock. The issue of what would be the best route for a canal across Central America was debated for 30 years, which led to the crossings in a number of locations like the one just mentioned. In addition, there was competition between England, France, New Granada, and the US factored into the race to build a canal. However, as early as 1845, entrepreneurs in the US believed that a railroad across the isthmus could be feasible. So 2 clever entrepreneurs, among others, obtained the rights to build a railroad across Panama. When the project broke ground in 1850, shortly after the gold rush began, it was expected to cost $1 million, a large sum at the time. It was finished 5 years later, about 1855, at a cost of $8 million. The Pacific Mail Steamship Company, newly established just prior to the gold rush, operated ships to both sides of the railroad, greatly decreasing the time it took to correspond coast to coast. So having a monopoly on the Panama transit, the railroad was a bonanza. Profits in the first 6 years were in excess of $7 million, and its stock price rose to $295 a share, a record on the New York Stock Exchange. The construction, as you might imagine, was much more complicated than anticipated, with logistical challenges arising from building across different terrains, swamps, mountains, jungle. Hundreds of bridges, and I mean hundreds, were required for support. Laborers were brought in from around the world, and the loss of lives that occurred, 12,000 men, foreshadowed what would occur 30 years later. Financially, it was the costliest railroad ever built on a per mile basis at the time, $140,000 per mile. However, they made a killing, as you can see. $7 million at that time was a tremendous amount of money. And so, just to show you what else was considered and being considered by different countries racing to make this canal, there was one proposed through Mexico. There was one proposed through Honduras, Nicaragua was really the second in line after Panama, although, as we'll see later, the supporters of the Panama crossing scared the Americans and the French into believing that Nicaragua has many more active volcanoes, which it actually wound up exploding one during the 1890s. And so it sort of tilted the Americans to choose this. And the other one was through Colombia, using this river as a possible. So this is a picture of the eastern terminal of the Panama Canal. Actually, even that's wrong. It's the western terminal, which was the side that came in from the Caribbean. And you can see they came right into the town of Cologne. When I went with my friend, the State Department asked us not to go to Cologne at all because it's rife with a lot of crime, whereas the Pacific side is and Panama City is a much more protected area. This is my friend and I on an original Panama Railroad car. Now, in 1854, wealthy French diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps convinces the president of Egypt to build the Suez Canal. The canal opened in 1869, with de Lesseps seen as the driving force, letting most of the expense of the canal fall to the Egyptians. The successful completion left him an iconic hero, earning the moniker the Great Engineer. Yet he was no such thing. He had no technical background of any kind, but was a persuasive diplomat. But to the French, he was a hero. And then 12 years later, he forms the Société de Géographie and sent an expedition to Darien, which is well east of the railroad, to survey a potential canal route. Going through Darien is truly going through jungle the entire way. The best they could recommend after harrowing experience through the jungle was a canal with a 9-mile tunnel through the Continental Divide, which de Lesseps rejected. He then sent them back to Panama, with de Lesseps insisting on a sea-level canal without locks nor tunnels. So de Lesseps had this great success building the Suez Canal, sort of moving sand out of the way, and there were no mountains to deal with. So he insisted that you could do this again without realizing there's this thing called the Continental Divide running through the middle of the entire isthmus, and you'd have to get through that Continental Divide in some way. But this is Ferdinand, he rejected this. And it's not clear why. He wasn't an engineer. And I'm not sure exactly what his ideas were. In the words of a seasoned engineer, de Lesseps was misjudging the magnitude of the undertaking, that a sea-level canal was physically impossible without a tunnel, also 9 miles long. However, nevertheless, de Lesseps wound up charming his audience into believing that it could be done. Ironically, one French engineer described a plan that contained all the basic elements ultimately designed into the current Panama Canal, but he was ignored. De Lesseps was aware that the railroad was important to the work, and so for $25 million, remember that they built it for $8 million, a third of the company Universal's resources, the railroad was purchased from those American entrepreneurs. The first yellow fever death occurred soon after the rainy season in July 1881, when the French started to bring people over. The French originally lied about the cause, yet built a hospital in Cologne, that's on the Caribbean side. By 1884, with most employees coming from Jamaica, 19,000 of them were in force. De Lesseps discovered too late the exceptional difficulties of the site: unstable soil, overpowering vegetation, virulent diseases, and especially the turbulent Chagres River. Over 8 years, 20,000 lives were lost to work hazards, malaria, and yellow fever. The project collapsed after an investment of £1 billion, which is 280 million today, and 800,000 shareholders lost their savings. Only de Lesseps' chief engineer, Philippe Bunau-Varilla, refused to abandon the project, and several years later formed a new Panama Canal Company. This is Philippe Bunau-Varilla, who winds up being playing a very important role in the United States being granted a treaty with Panama. This is the French trying to use, knowing that they had to clear the dirt from the Culebra Cut, and also other hills. This is a landslide. This is the track. But, so they knew they should use the railroad tracks to facilitate the building of the, or the digging out of the Culebra Cut and getting the material away, but they didn't use it in the right way. And part of that was because it was a little too early in technological development, but otherwise they were still trying to think about, when you think about it, they wanted to build this canal through the Culebra Cut by taking down all 360 feet of the hill and you then want the canal to be about 30 feet deep. So we're talking 390 feet of dirt, rock, and other substances, and that was impossible. Here, this is them beginning to work on dredging out near Cologne. So this is what they used the rails for. They had the Jamaicans take the debris by hand on the rails to dump it somewhere. Not a very efficient way to use the railroad. And so I just want to give you an idea using this. This is again, and this also helps you to realize that the canal goes northwest to southeast. So it begins up here at Cologne, and Cristobal actually means Christopher Columbus. So they have seen Christopher Columbus as someone important in discovering their country. And this is the Chagres River. It was a vicious river. The rainy season in Panama is unparalleled anywhere. And it would make the Chagres River just so turbulent. It's amazing that that first group of men who went across in 1850 made it at all. It's remarkable. But this is the path of the railroad from Panama City, past Miraflores, Pedro Miguel, and this is the famous Culebra Cut. And it parallels most of the river and then ends at Mount Hope, or they also called it Monkey Hill. There were a number of monkey islands, which when I took a different, actually a speedboat, we went to see different islands with monkeys on them, and they would actually come onto the boat and feed from you. It was really pretty cool. So this is Panama during the French era when they were going to start working. This is another view of a landslide, and this is a dredger, and it's trapped. Not to mention the people in the dredger. This is the kind of dredging machine, also powered by steam, but they lined up these buckets, and the buckets would get filled and would be transported to the top and then dumped out, and it was sort of a circular kind of system. Here you can see it up close, so it's picking up dirt and would be depositing in the rear. And this is men, mostly Jamaicans, working on starting to make a dent in the Culebra Cut. Again, at this point, they still think they're building a sea level canal. And so this is what it looked like in 1898. This is just equipment left over. Some people are there, but this is equipment left over by the French. The French's effort was 1881. I know they said 1892 before, but that's not true. It was 1881 to 1888. The French made their effort to build the canal. This is not YouTube. Let's see, where am I? Why don't I just try to... Okay. This, of course, is the tragedy of this book. When the first railroad, 1850, was completed, 12,000 men were lost. When the French were working on it between 1881 to 1888, 22,000 were lost. And by the time the US worked on it between 1904 and 1914, only 5,600 were lost. And as you'll be seeing, there, as early as the 1870s, there was a man in Cuba who actually isolated the exact type of mosquito that carries malaria and one that carries yellow fever. And it's just very tragic, and that's why this book reads like a drama, even though it's a nonfiction book. So, with having the exclusive rights from Colombia, de Lesseps arrives in the Panama region and removes the first shovel of dirt in December 1879, after a difficult ride on the railroad where a major bridge was underwater. The plan included constructing a 40-meter-high dam at Gamboa, which was the wrong area, to hold back the Chagres River, and a 75-foot-wide pathway through the Culebra Cut. The cost for the sea-level canal is $240 million, which de Lesseps hopes to acquire through lotteries in France and by charming the Americans. It so happens that de Lesseps went in the dry season. So he saw nothing of the horrors of what it was like for the workers in the rainy season, with torrential rains pouring down on you and mosquitoes everywhere. So difficulties faced by, this is a sort of a summary. De Lesseps insisted on the sea-level canal despite the advice that he was given. The mountain terrain and unstable soil were worse than expected. The tropical diseases, malaria and yellow fever, decimated the workforce, as we just saw. In August 1881 in Havana, Cuba, Dr. Carlos Finlay identified the mosquito as the carrier of yellow fever. This theory, really, people did not believe it. They couldn't believe that a mosquito could cause this. And it wouldn't be accepted until the early 20th century, during the first year, really, of the Americans being involved. The financial mismanagement, the project was plagued by cost overruns and corruption. The company overseeing construction raised funds through public lotteries, but eventually ran out of money. The engineering challenges, the heavy rainfall in Panama caused frequent landslides, washing away excavation efforts, especially in the Culebra Cut, and a lack of suitable technology to handle the volume of excavation required delayed progress. The workforce consisted of poorly trained and underpaid laborers, mostly from Jamaica when the French were doing this, and other islands. Again, terrible working conditions and high mortality led to constant labor shortages. They would talk about the daily death train going from the Culebra Cut north to the Cologne, northwest to the Cologne Hospital. Consequences, financial ruin. The French company, Universal du Canal Interoceanique, had to declare bankruptcy in 1889 after spending nearly $300 million with little progress to show. Again, over 800,000 investors, many of them small, lost their savings, leading to widespread public outrage. This, in turn, led to legal and criminal consequences. Ferdinand de Lesseps, Charles de Lesseps, and remember, Ferdinand de Lesseps is a godlike figure up until this point in France. He's for the Suez Canal. And other company officials were implicated in corruption and fraud. They were tried in a highly publicized scandal known as the Panama Affair. Due to his advanced age, Ferdinand avoided prison, but Charles was sentenced to 5, and the appeal reduced it to 2 years. They were both originally sentenced to 5, but because Ferdinand was so old, they cut it down to 2, but he didn't have to serve. So once Ferdinand de Lesseps, once a national hero for the Suez Canal achievement, had his reputation highly tarnished by the failure in Panama. He died a broken man in 1894. So Ferdinand de Lesseps is, was so important. Of course, when the Statue of Liberty was constructed by the French, Ferdinand de Lesseps was the representative of France to come by. And that was before the canal even got started. The David McCullough book contains numerous descriptions of the impact of yellow fever and malaria upon the human body and the absolutely tragic losses of entire families of French engineers and the families they brought with them. It's impossible to review all of this. There was this one individual, Jules Gingler, who was appointed the newest chief engineer by the French. He brought his wife, his son, his daughter, and her fiance to Panama with him in late 1882. In January 1883, his daughter died. In May of 1883, his son died. A little bit later in the year, his wife died, and then finally the fiancé died. Then he went back to France, and he died about a year later, but he didn't have yellow fever. So it's stories like that in this book that just make it so moving. A major aide and proponent of the French effort, Philippe Bunau-Varilla, never stopped his pursuit of having the canal built. He spent years politicking American politicians with the help of a well-known influencer, the lawyer William Cromwell. The Americans themselves were still unsure of which route to take across the isthmus. Had President William McKinley not been shot and killed, it may have taken the canal through Nicaragua. Again, to look closely at Nicaragua, it would have started here, and they were going to use this river, go through this lake, and then cut through there. But again, the idea that Nicaragua had more active volcanoes became obvious once there happened to be one in the 1890s. Key figures and events leading to U.S. success, of course, when McKinley was shot, Roosevelt instantly became president. Roosevelt was the major driving force behind the U.S.'s decision to take over the canal project. He viewed the canal as essential to expanding American influence, improving global trade, and strengthening the U.S. Navy. Philippe Bunau-Varilla, again, played a critical role in persuading the U.S. to take over the abandoned French project. Along with a major U.S. lobbyist, as I just mentioned, he lobbied senators and representatives alike who would be crucial in passing the legislation enabling U.S. to take on the task. He was also instrumental in orchestrating Panamanian independence from Colombia and drafting the treaty that gave the U.S. control of the canal zone. He was able to get the French originally wanted to sell their remains of what they did which was 2 hospitals, hundreds of buildings, the railroad, and 36,689,965 cubic yards of excavation concluded. Finally talked them down to 100 million, which Roosevelt thought was ridiculous. And he got them to agree to 40 million, which Roosevelt paid. The first engineer was John Wallace. Again, there's stories in this book about all these people and their personalities and characters and what they were really cut out for and what their strengths and weaknesses were. He was the first U.S. engineer, but faced enormous difficulties, including disease, poor infrastructure, and inadequate equipment. He was not able to develop an overall plan for the canal. He didn't have the vision that really was needed. He was poor at communication with the day laborers and had a sullen, pessimistic, and passive attitude. He was then fired by the Secretary of War, William Howard Taft. Roosevelt then hired John Stevens as chief engineer, who really was the hero for the Americans. He had built the Great Northern Railroad and helped finding the Marias Pass, the passage over the U.S. continental divide. He was adept at working in many challenging topographies. He improved worker living conditions and emphasized disease control. He was clear in the need for a lock-based design. His leadership turned the project around. Stevens saw quickly that the Panama Railroad was the lifeline along which not only men, but food supplies, everything he needed to sustain the work, would have to move freely and efficiently, especially the Calibre dirt trains. He improved the railroad within a year. It was a mess when he got there. Double tracking with heavier rail, stronger bridges, working signals. For reasons that were unclear, Stevens, who really invented all of those machines that you saw on the YouTube video, the track shifter, the way of getting the debris to a certain area and then sort of getting it to be smoothed out. But for reasons that were unclear, he who had set up all the systems to be completed successfully, let me go back. He resigned after several years, and McCullough sort of implies that he was worried about dying. He really was concerned about dying of either malaria or yellow fever, even though by the time he left, the numbers of people dying was much, much less. Dr. William Gorgas was the sanitation. He had worked with Dr. Finlay, as you remember, who identified the mosquito in Cuba, and along with Dr. Walter Reed of Walter Reed Hospital, and witnessed the success Finlay had with a huge extermination effort that virtually eliminated yellow fever. This was in Havana. He was then vital in eradicating yellow fever and controlling malaria by targeting the mosquitoes responsible for these diseases. The city of Panama was fumigated house by house, as was Cologne. Fumigation brigades were formed, cisterns and cesspools were oiled once a week, which the oil makes it very unattractive to the laying of eggs by the mosquitoes. Once Gorgas's program was underway, the incidence of yellow fever fell off with the same dramatic suddenness. By December 1906, the disease had disappeared from the isthmus, which was pretty incredible. That was only 2 years into the US effort. So after John Stevens left, George Goethals was picked as the chief engineer by Roosevelt. He was the final and most successful chief engineer, a skilled military engineer. He brought discipline and efficiency to the project, served in the role until its completion in 1914. The work spanned the next two presidents, William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson. Goethals, unfortunately, was the embodiment of an elitist, hardened racist who was all business. However, under his leadership, the canal was completed on time and within budget. That's Mr. Wallace, who really built most of those incredible ships. This is, no, I think that was Stevens, and this is Wallace, who built all the wonderful engineering devices. Panama's independence from Colombia. At the time President Roosevelt was pushing to begin the canal project, Panama was just a province of the United States of Colombia. Roosevelt wanted no interference from Colombia, often made disparaging remarks about them, and secretly met with the then president of the Department of Panama, Dr. Manuel Amador, who for quite some time was the most prominent individual in Panama. Of course, the two lobbyists met with him as well. By October 1903, a secret plan was hatched to help Panama declare its independence from Colombia. On November 3rd, 1903, Panama declared independence from Colombia. The U.S. promptly recognized the new Republic of Panama and deployed warships to strategic locations to deter Colombian forces. So they had warships on the Pacific side and the American side. And of course, bribery of certain members of the Colombian Navy helped the process as well. Colombia was really known for having a pretty unstable government throughout, actually still does today. And so by bribing some of those ship captains who were supposed to be guarding the locks or the excavation, they were able to get them to leave. As a result of these events, Philippe Bunau-Varilla, who had been appointed envoy extraordinary of the Republic of Panama, which I think he appointed himself, negotiated the all-important treaty with the U.S. Secretary of State, John Hay. So in the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty, the U.S. was empowered to construct a canal through a zone 10 miles in width, but not to include the cities of Panama City or Cologne. The U.S. was in charge of sanitation, sewage, water supply, and public order in those cities, but they were not part of the U.S. Canal Zone. The U.S. had the right to expropriate any additional land or water areas necessary and convenient for the construction of the canal. Most importantly, within the canal zone, the U.S. was given all the rights, power, and authority to treat the canal zone as if it were sovereign territory, to the exclusion of the Republic of Panama. After more politicking, the treaty was ratified by the U.S. Congress. For the next 30 miles from Cologne, there was evidence of excavation in solid rock as far as Miraflores, which is toward the Pacific side, except for a 7-mile stretch at Culebra, which had been cut to a depth of 163 feet below its original surface. The useful portions of the French work amounted to 30 million cubic yards of Panama that no longer stood in the path of the canal, but they had left 2,000 buildings, half of which were salvageable, and as I said before, 2 hospitals. And the Panama Railroad really had to be improved. So Roosevelt's ideal all along was using railroad men to lead the construction. And that first guy, Wallace, was a president of a number of engineering societies and builder of major railroads. So this is the U.S. Canal Zone. So if you have an imaginary straight line through the path of the canal, it's 5 miles on either side of the canal zone, not including the town of Cologne or Panama itself. And so basically this was all U.S. territory, from the Gatun locks. Here's what was built, the Gatun Dam, which really made this possible, made the canal possible, and flooded this whole area. This became, sorry. So this became the largest man-made lake in the world, and kind of like the Quabbin Reservoir, they had to flood 5 or 6 towns, and the Panamanians were not happy with that, but because not only were their towns gone, but they also had to move more than 5 miles away. And so as you can see, the canal was going to follow pretty much the line of the railroad, except that it diverts here, whereas the railroad also goes up there. So in 1906, President Roosevelt left Washington to visit the canal and observe the progress. He became the first president to leave the country while in office. So this was a big deal. And Roosevelt, in contrast to de Lesseps, tried to go at the worst possible time weather-wise. He went during the rainiest of the rainy season because he wanted to see what the conditions were. It was a luminous visit that inspired the workers and administrators alike. No one in his party could keep up with him. He literally traveled the length of the canal, purposely timing his visit so he could see the worst weather possible. His second day, 3 inches of rain fell in less than 2 hours. He saw the Chagres River surge 100 yards over its banks while parts of the railroad were underwater. Villages were knee-deep in water. He was fascinated with the huge Bucyrus shovels, which could clear 4 times as much dirt as the American shovels the French had used. When he reached the Culebra Cut, the rain was pouring in sheets. Although at an early stage, it was already the largest cavern in the Earth's surface ever made. So, of course, again, remembering that the approach was to raise the water, whereas de Lesseps wanted to take all of the Culebra Cut down from the Continental Divide, then 29 feet further, whereas unfortunately, while they had to flood 5 or 6 villages, the Americans had the lake created and couldn't have been created without the building of the Gatun Dam. So here's Roosevelt in one of the Bucyrus shovels, just trying it out. And here he is on one of the trains heading, I think, southward, southeast. This is one of the American people looking at the stuff that was left and would have to be dredged out of the water. But this was left over by the French. And this is a fumigation car, which, as part of this whole massive fumigation brigade, they would be going up and down in towns and along the possible route of the canal. Here, a fumigation brigade in Panama City. So they really used the people in Panama to help fumigate. Because any standing water, even in a plant that is filled with rainwater, can harbor mosquitoes or have a mosquito lay eggs. You can catch yellow fever or malaria after it's already bitten someone who has it. And since there were so many mosquitoes and so many people, that's why it was so practically contagious. Now this is I wish it was a little bit more clear, but the Americans developed, as you saw in that YouTube video, this overhead tramway where buckets of cement would be delivered to where it needed to go. So this is during the building of one of the locks. And here, the Americans were also subject to landslides. This is that machine that they built and moved up and down, again, to distribute a lot of the cement. And this is the use of the railroad to take the whole section of this cut to a place where they could get rid of the debris. And here you're starting to see what the Americans finally came up with, which, as you'll see very clearly, eventually was a terraced approach. This still had a landslide. You know, they called it the angle of repose. You know, if the opening is like this, of course it's going to be a landslide, very possibly, but if you have to sort of level it out as much as you can so that after the rain, the dirt will not come rushing down. And that took sort of more and more shaving of the tops of the calibre cut. And here is the result of a landslide. There's somebody buried in here. They got the bucket out, but the machine is buried under rock and debris. And here is the result of a partial landslide, but also you can see how flexible this interesting alloy of metal was. And that's what they used that track shifter with. So these are all the unskilled laborers. The people running the machines were almost universally white. And here you can see the tremendous effort in building the lock system and the structure that moved up and down with cement. And here's the excavator pouring what was excavated into the train. And this, as you remember, the French had 2 people pushing something half the size, not using the train, even though it was there. And here you're getting a sense more of how to do this terracing so that would lower the likelihood of a landslide. Here is another landslide in the calibre cut. And I mean, there was so much lost time because of landslides, which just told them, well, we've got to take more stuff off each side. Now, this just gives you an idea of the gigantic size of the lock. Here's a 6-foot-tall person. The ships eventually are going to come in here. The gates, each gate weighed between 650 and 720 tons each. And they ran eventually on electricity, which when they built the Gatun Dam to form the lake, they had culverts in the middle, and that would create hydroelectric power. So the dimensions of lock chambers were 110 feet wide by 1,000 feet long. On the Middlesex Canal, it was 30 feet wide and 11.5 feet long. The canal consumed 61 million sticks of dynamite, about 400,000 a month. The calibre cut was 300 feet wide and about 9 miles long, even for the Americans. As we saw, there were numerous landslides. The workforce in the last years of construction was about 45,000 with only 6,000 white people. By the way, Jamaica refused to send anyone to the effort of the Americans because they lost 19,000 men with the French. To lift the great merchant liner to the level of the Gatun Lake required 26 million gallons of water and double that amount to make it back to sea level. The engineering of the lock mechanisms are well explained in McCullough's book. Needless to say, it took a great deal of electricity. 1,500 electric motors, half of which were purchased by General Electric, to open these gates, 650 to 700 tons. The canal opened in August 1914, when the construction of all the locks was finished, and as you saw, Woodrow Wilson played a role. The Gatun location was in most ways ideal for a dam. It was upstream of the dam site. The hills enclosing the Chagres River opened very wide around that area that's now Gatun Lake. The only problem was the huge scale of the dam required massive rock and dirt fill that was provided by 100 train loads of waste rock deposited into two parallel walls of waste rock 2,700 feet apart every day for several years from the Culebra cut and the Gatun Locks excavation. The dam contains 600 million cubic feet of material and is 2,700 feet wide at its base, almost 105 feet high, and 7,500 feet long. The dam weighs 27 million tons. It covers 290 acres of ground and contains enough earth and rock to build a wall 4 feet 8 inches high and a foot thick around the earth at the equator. So if you can imagine, this dam was a half-mile wide at the bottom and slowly came up this way. And so it was incredibly stable. The Chagres River was completely tamed, and it allowed for being so high that it's never flooded above the dam but to build the culverts in the middle created a hydroelectric plant, which to this day has run the Panama Canal. So here's the dam, and here's the culverts, and you can see the rushing of the water as it goes through the dam. There's a little bit of a close-up look. And this is the hydroelectric house that's attached to the culverts in the dam. Oops. Oh, this is a picture of the SS Ancon, A-N-C-O-N, which was the first ship to go through the Panama Canal the whole way. This I'll skip. These are just some of the references I used. So, if you'd like, we can take a break right now for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to show you the videos I took on my trip. Here's the dam. This is the lake. Okay? The river starts up here, okay, and was coming all the way out to the Caribbean on the eastern side of the continental divide. So, oh really? They let you swim in the lake?
We went to shore. It was anchored in the lake, and then we took the small ship out towards the land there, and then they were, there was lifeguards on duty, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were available and wanted to go swimming, so we did.
That's great. I mean, it's fresh water. You know, a lot of the people in the canal group wanted to know what do you do with, you know, why didn't they figure out a way to get rid of the because they used so much water in each locking through that it would reduce. So they would ask, why didn't they use seawater, or why wasn't there a way to recycle the fresh water underneath the ground? And they didn't. They actually, when they have been building, these are new locks. There's the Gatun locks and the Agua Clara locks, and on the Pacific side, there's the Cocoli locks, which were recently built in the 2010s for larger ships. And so again, there were at least 5 villages flooded here, but it usually maintains a water level about 87 feet above sea level. So are we ready to begin again? So this is a modern look at the canal. So the railroad is still there, as you can see, with here, and it comes out at this part of Cologne. You go through the Gatun locks, and here's the dam where they have the hydroelectric station. And then here is the famous Culebra Cut, that, this is the Continental Divide. And de Lesseps literally wanted to cut the whole way down, which would have taken 30 years, if it was possible, because they would have kept seeing that they'd have to smooth out the sides again and again and again, so there wouldn't be so many landslides. My visit on the canal, I stayed right here in Gamboa. It was called the Gamboa Rainforest Resort. I stayed there for 3 nights after staying actually over here, which is Old Panama. Old Panama had the same building that the French used as the headquarters for the Interoceanic Canal, is now the museum of the Panama Canal. And I stayed three buildings away from that for 5 or 6 days. And then we came up here, and it was a little spooky because on the way we saw a lot of abandoned houses by the Americans, since the Americans had to leave in 1999. But what's interesting is that it is vital that we were there in World War I and II. The Panamanians could not have defended this canal in World War II, that's for sure. There were submarines off of the coast of Brazil that were sinking ships leaving Brazil. They easily could have come up to Panama, but we had Navy ships on both sides. And also it was used to move men from the west to the east to go to Europe. It was quite a bit of use of that. And so this is the profile. So the water is 85 to 87 feet above sea level. And then the Culebra Cut comes, and then it goes further down. So you'll see in some of the videos, they did not take us. We had to go meet here, and a bus took us up to Gamboa, even though we were in Gamboa. We thought we were going to come all the way up here, but they just decided not to go near Cologne. So we started it in Gamboa, which you know, you'll see was a good enough place to start. So as soon as we got on the water, this is what I saw, which is a container ship. These are, you know, these are those containers that are the size of railroad cars. And this was going toward Cologne. And the one thing that the Middlesex Canal and the Panama Canal have in common is that they both ran southeast to northwest. Let's see.
Part of the canal, which is called Gaylord Cut. It's 9 miles, 14 kilometers of narrow, winding, zigzagging Gaylord Cut.
So there the canal is quite wide. You can see how the width of the Gatun Lake.
Would pick up the huge crane lock gates for maintenance. Si miran enfrente de nosotros pueden apreciar que se aproxima un crucero
It's a cruise ship.
saliendo de
One of the giant cruise ships.
would pick up the huge crane lock gates for maintenance. Si miran enfrente de nosotros pueden apreciar que se aproxima un crucero saliendo de...
He spoke in 7 different languages. So now we're beginning
Los 52 millones de galones de agua
container ship coming the same way we were.
que cada embarcación pierde.
These were antennas left by the
And the Chagres River is the main provider of fresh water to the planet.
There's a whole village outside of our Gamboa resort, which were empty but colorful houses, and they were all used for the Americans when they were there.
The map, and you think
So
that
here we're
America,
starting to
the
go to
continent,
Cleaver Cut.
from Alaska all the way down to the tip of South America is one land
You'll
mass.
see
Out of sheer respect
These
for our
are
good friends from the Korean islands,
concrete,
accepting those islands, you would
concrete
think
with
it's only one
rebar.
land mass.
steel enforced terraces, but nature, of course, has taken over. In the distance is the Centennial Bridge, which comes right after the Cleaver Cut. Centennial because it was built in 2014, which was the 100th anniversary. Now we're in the Cleaver Cut. You can see the terraced. Again, all of those are being grown over, but it's reinforced concrete. It doesn't have any more landslides. So just to think, these were connected even higher, like from up here to way up there by the mountain.
Atlantic.
Just look at
And then on top on the right center, that is where the waters will go to the Pacific. That is called the summit of the continent. That is the continental divide. You'll notice also the staggered steps and benches, and that is actually squares of white concrete. You have squares of white concrete with steel beams in the middle, and that helps to additional structural support to avoid that collapsing on. Llegarán al kilómetro cero de la carretera panamericana en Alaska. If we notice those big cars and trucks, if they drive from the left to the right, and they drive and drive and drive, they will eventually reach the 0-mile marker of the Pan American Highway in Alaska.
That's what he says. Now, this is a photo of approaching, so the two locks that take you down the 87 feet to the sea level are first the Pedro Miguel locks and then the Miraflores locks. So we're approaching the Miraflores locks. And you can see
Hiroshima in Japan.
these are those engines,
So we have a total of 5.
the mules.
And they will help the big ships, not our ship, the big ships, that they will help to be able to keep the ship in the middle of the chamber, because those electric power locomotives, they have.
These two pleasure boats had to connect to our ship. They couldn't, they had to connect to our ship so they also would not touch the sides of the lock. So here's a photo looking from the back of our boat to the first set of gates closing. After, as you can see, the container ship is right here. Here's the cable that goes to one of these. They're just pure electric engines, and they're strong enough. They're built by Kawasaki at this point. They're strong enough to pull the boat and keep it away from the sides.
Behind us, and then we will be sealed off in the beautiful first descent chamber. I want you to look to the right side, quiero que miran a la derecha. Se puede apreciar el bajo nivel de agua
We have to
dulce
get
que
in there.
tenemos
They have to attach to
en
us.
el canal de nuestro vida. We notice that we have very low water here.
By the way, when we were
And we
there,
normally don't
the water
have it
was
this low.
low.
But eventually, when the rainy season starts,
Couldn't take
things
as
will
many
get much
ships
better.
through the canal
Hopefully.
at once as they usually do, which makes for a real mess at the Pacific end. 30 boats waiting in line. Some of which will have to wait 2 weeks.
Let me take the picture for you.
And there were also apparently bribes given to the Panamanians to move up the line so that you can get through quicker. All of this was
I can't see Mama.
done by 1914, which is pretty amazing. about 50 people on board. And this is a look at the locks at the level that we were at. These 700-ton gates open. Just for extra measure, they made double gates. It's just remarkable after being on the Erie Canal and canals in England, which were narrowboat canals, 40 feet wide. To see this was just breathtaking. See how they recess, just like ours did. They were made out of wood and they were about 150 pounds on the Middlesex.
And you want to know, when you go back home and you have the electric power motor to cut the grass, it could be 3.5 horsepower, maybe 5 horsepower. But powerful engines that open and close these lockers are 25 horsepower. Unbelievable.
So now we've done half of the 87 feet, 85, 87 feet. Then we're going to proceed to the...
And the word flower,
These are the mirror forest locks.
so you meet us,
And in that building on the left
what
are
don't you see?
tourists who pay a fee to watch boats go through the locks. So there's going to be about 200 people up there, which was, and that's one of the new wider locks.
If you look to the right side here,
These are the top of the gates you can see sticking out.
this is the enemy dentro de los Estados Unidos, el mismo efecto que le da todo para hacer un nuevo juego de cruces. ¿Y qué pasó en diciembre 7 de 1941? Japoneses invadieron Pearl Harbor y de la guerra separaron de Puerto.
So here's a photo. Here's the tourists packed and kind of cheering us on, I guess. And this is just before we start to lower. I remember the experience of looking at the crowd, and the gate, the railing was here. I could see the crowd, and then all of a sudden, 27 feet later, I could just see the top of the lock, and the crowd couldn't possibly see the ship. It was really quite a feeling.
Un saludo a los visitantes del nuevo anexo del Centro de Visitantes en
We're at the
Miraflores.
top, and then we'll see what's going, how far down we go. So here we're on our way down.
Señoras y señores, suenan las campanas, pero no es porque mi amigo y mi jefe Rubén Rey le está cantando. Suenan las campanas, suenan. Las campanas suenan porque van a abrir las compuertas y los empleados del canal no pueden pasar arriba, lógicamente porque la están abriendo. The bells are ringing, ladies and gentlemen. It's not that the Beatles are singing. That's the warning sign for the employees to not try to cross above the lock gate because they are being opened. We are now at 27 feet above sea level. We are now 8 meters above sea level. En estos momentos estamos Hemos terminado la segunda etapa de descenso de las 3 que tenemos que tomar y estamos ahorita a 27 pies arriba del nivel de mar, 8 metros. Imagínense que estas compuertas son tan altas como un edificio de 8 pisos. Unas pesan 692 toneladas, otras 703 toneladas. Y el motor de su máquina de cortar la grama en casa puede ser de 3.5 caballos o 5 caballos. La fuerza que requiere para abrir y cerrar estas inmensas compuertas que están tan balanceadas en un motor de 25 caballos. Vamos entonces a entrar al tercer proceso de descenso. La ventaja que tenemos.
2 more dams on each side of the canal from here down to the Pacific. They're not as large as the Gatun Dam, but they're there to keep the water from flowing into the jungle. That's just a hummingbird. And this is their Ferdinand de Lesseps Memorial, and there are busts of all the other French people, whereas I didn't see much of anything dedicated to the US. So the United States, in 1964, there were student riots in Panama demanding sovereignty for the canal zone. And by 1968, it had gotten really out of hand. There was international pressure, and so Jimmy Carter came to an agreement with Panamanian President General Amador, and came to the agreement in 1978 that the United States would yield over the canal zone on December 31st, 1999. And it's been owned by the Panamanians since, not China. And this is the Bridge of the Americas. This has always been there since very early on, as we're going out to the Pacific, and then there's a lineup of boats out here. As I said, about 30 boats, some of which, this is morning in the jungle. I've never been as hot as I was in Panama, ever. I've been to Phoenix 10 times, but this kind, you could walk through and get totally wet, and it's not raining. It's just so humid that I couldn't even imagine how these people were digging out excavation dirt while it was teeming, pouring rain. And I'm just saying that the humidity, regardless of what time of day, this is pretty early morning, but regardless of the time of day, it felt like it was so penetrating all day long. Like I said, I've never been this hot, but yeah, so that is the end of my trip. This is this is Iceland. Thank you. If anybody is interested, the Middlesex Canal has a museum in North Billerica. It's on Faulkner Street. Faulkner, yeah. The Faulkner Mill. We're in the Faulkner Mill building.
When is it open?
It's open Saturday and Sunday from 12 to 4. If anybody would like to join the Middlesex Canal Association, it's $15 for a member, $25 for a proprietor. The first proprietor of the Middlesex Canal Association was John Hancock, who paid $2 a share for 400 shares. Now it's only $25. and there isn't much canal to see, but we lead walks twice a year. I have designed a walk in the town I live in, Wilmington, at the town park. If anybody would ever like to go there, it's right off Route 38 going south towards Woburn in Wilmington. And you know, probably most of you have gone on Route 129 from Wilmington to Billerica, and you pass the Shawshene Aqueduct. That structure that is one huge middle pier, and it goes across. That was in 1974. It was a civil engineering commemoration. Yeah.
To be able to see the canal all along there until they built the houses.
Yes, and well, now the canal, as you're before you get to the Shawshene River, there's a ditch before the houses, and most people don't know or think about what's this ditch. It's the Middlesex Canal, but nature has taken over for real. I wish our state was as mindful of its history as New York State, which has done an amazing job. If you really want to get the feel of being on a canal, like this couple here rented a boat on the Erie, went from Syracuse east and then west past Syracuse to Buffalo. You know, the Middlesex Canal, like most other canals, certainly the Erie, made the towns along the way. Some towns didn't want the Middlesex Canal to be a bother, but you know, Wilmington hops were desired by some brewery in New Jersey, and over a period of 15 years in the 1830s, Wilmington made $2.5 million off of hops that they grew wild in my backyard. They're everywhere. But I would welcome you to come to the museum anytime. Like I said, it's across from the summit pond of the canal, of the Middlesex Canal, which is the Concord River, and there's a dam there, and it's that water rushing over the dam that would go underneath the tail races of the mills and turn the turbines of the mills. And it's a very nice place, even though we're now in a battle with the National Oceanographic and Aeronautics Administration because they want to destroy the dam, which is on the National Register of Historic Places, but they want to revert the area back to the 1630s before any dam was built. I mean, the Middlesex Canal was not the first place to build a dam there. As soon as somebody could figure out how to build a dam, they did in 1660 and had mills there for grain. And then over the years, other people built dams there. And unfortunately, they want to restore diadromous fish, that just means fish that go upstream to spawn. And they think that they can only do it by destroying our dam instead of building a fishway, which is what we're arguing for. We'll see my, this is Paul McCartney's house. England had, yeah. Oh. No, they're Panamanians now. Yeah. I'm sure they may import some other people who are maybe schooled in engineering a little bit more. But other than that, it's Panamanians who run it. It's like I said, it's the largest source of income for all of Panama whether it gets distributed to the people or not, I don't know. This was when the Yankees and the Red Sox played in London. I went to that game with my buddy when we were 65. But actually, the best place to see a whole network of canals is England. It's amazing. It's almost like if you think of railroads here connecting every city, that's what canals do in England. They're right on the outside of London. They go all the way north, past Liverpool, Blackpool, almost as north as Hadrian's Wall, which was the separation of the Roman Empire from outside the Roman Empire. And that's the British Museum showing you the Oxford Dodo, which is now. So thank you for coming. If anybody would like to take an application for the Middlesex Canal Association, it's right here, and I really recommend for those readers in the audience, I wholly recommend this. It's really a wonderful book. Thank you.